356. 357. Hey everyone, Rainbow Dash is currently practicing for her Equestria-wide victory bow. 358. A new feat where she flies so fast that her own sonic rain boom gets caught up in her wake and carries to the far corners of Equestria. 359. This is just her doing some warm-up laps. What's that you say? Such an idea seems absurd? That it defies the realm of physics? Yeah, I mentioned that to Rainbow Dash and she was all like, as if I cared about egghead stuff like that. To which Twilight may have taken issue, but personally I expected such a reaction. Not because Rainbow isn't intelligent enough to understand limitations. She recognizes such things. 360, yet a vital part of Rainbow's character is her enjoyment of challenges and her determination to defeat limitations. She's always pushing herself to be stronger than before, sometimes to her detriment. 361, and she's giving me a lewd gesture for using that last clip. But that's a part of being a pony who attacks life's challenges to overcome herself. This represents a very key part of the human psyche, often embodied in the Amazon archetype. Once again, I looked at the ideas of Carl Jung, a psychologist and psychoanalyst who saw a lot of similarities in the world's stories and viewed them as an expression of both our ideal and worst possible selves. One critical element of the female psyche is expressed by the warrior women characters often associated with the ancient Amazons. But before getting too far, I should tackle the idea that Jung was both a product of his time and very rigid in his views. Jung was notoriously sexist, to the point where he found the idea of women wearing pants rather than dresses to be offensive. I can only assume he'd have a negative opinion of bronies. Part of the archetype's foundation is that they're organized under very binary terms. They're either masculine or feminine, and often lack an equivalent. Our modern view on gender is changing. The January 2017 issue of National Geographic goes into detail on how views of gender roles are changing in America, as well as talking about gender roles and traditions in other parts of the world. Does this change make Jung's view on archetypes outdated? I think not, because it still touches on a core element of human personalities. But I do think we have to adapt that view and recognize that we see parts of ourselves in all archetypes. The fact that so many bronies can identify with the characters in My Little Pony demonstrates that people are more diverse than Jung's original arbitrary concept. With all that said, I can finally talk about Rainbow's archetype, the Amazon. A more modern term might be the tomboy, though that's been used as both an insult and a compliment. Out of all the female archetypes, the Amazon is the one who taps into the competitive and courageous nature of the animus. What's the animus, you ask? Well, let's look at Philly Dash to understand. Suppose that growing up you had a role model who became the ideal of how a man or woman should behave. For some, this can be a parent or a strong family relation. For others, it's not necessarily a blood relation, but someone who came to embody an ideal. It's worth noting that the rainbow mane stallion seen in games Ponies Play is often assumed to be Dash's daddy, but according to the show's lead character designer, Cora Kosaka, that was not her dad. Even the interplay card that named him Rainbow Blaze lists him as a dashing mentor, and the flavor text claims he taught everything Rainbow knows. He may not be her father, but I do think we can assume that this stallion set an example for Rainbow Dash. At some point in our lives, we tuck that memory and its influence into our subconscious. We grow up and become more sure of our own identity, but that view of the opposite gender remains. For males, this is the unconscious influence known as the anima. For women, the repressed male identity becomes the animus. Yet after we grow up and become more confident in our own identity, we start to pull the anima or animus out of storage and integrate it into ourselves. The man who has grown into his own identity might learn to ease up on proving that he is a man and start caring about forming connections with others, or showing more kindness. But that's why I think that if someone has to insist, "I'm manly," they're probably not done growing up, regardless of how many years have passed. For a woman who has tapped into the animus, like the Amazon, they learn to stand for themselves. They find exhilaration in competition and find the courage to push back. It needn't be through physical force as Rainbow often demonstrates.
I ought to press you into
It's more a thrill of facing a new challenge and seeking an answer.
Why don't we do some late-night research? See what we can find out.
Or accepting a challenge and meeting it in turn.
It is on!
That's the funny thing about archetypes. We are never truly just one, but a collaboration. It's why the main six work so well as a group. Each fulfills a role that we can find within a person's persona, yet each also demonstrates their own diverse personality, avoiding being cliches. And it's important to recognize this because Rainbow Dash has avoided the pitfalls that often undermine other female characters. One of the biggest misconceptions about Amazon-like characters is that the animus has completely consumed them. That they're portrayed as so masculine that they refuse any kind of feminine characteristics because that's somehow degrading. Yet look at how Rainbow Dash behaves when she coaches Scootaloo, or how she learns to push Fluttershy. Remember how much she would fan over the Wonderbolts? Now it's true that she puts on airs, that Rainbow is unwilling to let herself be vulnerable because she thinks that will cost her respect. Yet there's a difference between covering for one's feelings and a lacking of said feelings. Rainbow has a diverse emotional range, and the show makes it a point to demonstrate that she's covering up for those emotions because of ego.
Darn it! Now you got me acting all sappy!
The Amazon's real defining traits are an adventurous spirit, an independent mindset, and the ability to cooperate, compete, and commiserate with the opposite sex. Which is something interesting to note. Outside of family relations, who amongst the main six has the most interaction with stallions? Not in a romantic sense, but social. Answer: I think Rainbow Dash. Whether it's squaring off against opponents, whipping the lazy into shape, supporting peers, or finding a rival, the Amazon archetype actually welcomes relations with male characters. The more a male can offer a challenge, the better. Now you might ask what happens when women run up against the glass ceiling in the real world, followed by how Rainbow Dash can be an example of this archetype when she doesn't have to contend with gender barriers. Well, I'd point towards her very first race and some less than honorable actions by her opponents.
Later, Rainbow Crash!
Hey!
Rainbow's reaction to this wasn't resentment or complaint. There was no denying it's wrong, but Rainbow used that to push herself further. The Amazon archetype is the one most likely to break through that glass ceiling. Not necessarily to invoke social change, though that can be a goal, but on some level the Amazon archetype views this as a challenge. Personalities like Rainbow's view an unfair situation as all the more thrilling because it makes their victory all the sweeter. That's not to say that all relationships are based on competition. In fact, the Amazon will often favor advancement over relationships, which is why Rainbow often appears insensitive towards her own friends. Whether it's winning a competition or gaining her own amusement, Rainbow Dash does care for her friends, but often her focus lies elsewhere. It isn't until she sees the consequence of her actions that she realizes how she's erred.
There's a big difference between pushing yourself as hard as you can and just being reckless.
Now, having talked about Rainbow Dash as the example of an ideal Amazon archetype, we should also devote some attention to the shadows, both aggressive and passive. The aggressive shadow goes by many names, but I've gone with one, the castrator. That is all the stallions in Equestria, crying out in fear. I think Lightning Dust fits this shadow best. The castrator is every bit as determined as her Amazon counterpart, but focuses tremendous anger on the unfair competition that the Amazon finds so thrilling. She knows that things are unfair, and so that becomes the central theme for all conflicts, great and small. She will take great pride in beating down another, either physically or emotionally, because that makes her feel more powerful. Often this can seem like confidence, but it's rooted in insecurity.
I mean, it's not our fault we're so much better than those other guys. Not every pony is destined to become a Wonderbolt. Only the best of the best, right?
That said, I'm hoping we'll see her return and confront Rainbow Dash in the near future. There's a lot of potential for stories between these two. The passive shadow isn't directly related to Rainbow Dash. I would point towards Moondancer's darker phase as an example. The passive shadow of the Amazon, known as the victim, has given up on pushing forward and decided instead on retreat. She blames the unfair systems within the world for her state and doesn't allow herself the chance to heal. This does not mean that she is quiet in her isolation, as Moondancer demonstrated. And while her anger and pain may be justified, she's using it as an excuse to stop trying. Now, please don't get me wrong, I enjoy Moondancer's character, but part of that enjoyment was seeing her accept her pain, find ways to overcome it, and start moving forward. Because that is what the Amazon provides to so many. the courage to go forward and face the unknown and new challenges. It's not the absence of fear, but rather its defeat. And I think that's a trait both men and women admire. Not someone who sets out with the goal to hurt others to boost themselves, but a courageous heart that refuses to let the world dictate terms. This courage manifests not just in the physical abilities, but in career pursuit, organization, leadership, and the ability to raise others through inspiration rather than intimidation. That's something we can all respect and emulate. Though I wouldn't attempt to duplicate this next stunt at home. It looks like Rainbow's done with her warm-up. That's pretty amazing. I'm Silver-Quill. Thanks for watching.